It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retired. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Retire Repurposed. On behalf of BenTaatjes and myself, we are so glad that you are joining us here today. Well, unfortunately, the retirement conversation usually is about financial planning and wealth accumulation. And oftentimes, our focus on money can overshadow what truly matters to our loved ones. Through a client story, BenTaatjes reveals the unexpected reaction of someone inheriting a large sum of money from a deceased parent. This episode reminds listeners that while financial security is important, the most valuable legacy we can leave is often our time and our presence. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, welcome back. Jared Sylvester here joining you on Retire Repurposed. So glad that you're joining us here today. And if you happen to be new to our podcast, this is a new conversation about retirement, a different conversation, one which you find more purpose, more fulfillment, more exhilaration, more excitement. Really, it's you walking into the greatest season of your life. And that is certainly countercultural with how a lot of people and even society looks at retirement, mostly as a time to settle down and actually do less. And in some respects, not all respects, but in some respects, retiring repurpose is really where you start to really step into your greatness and your fullness. You know, we've had a really interesting little series here the last 4 shows or so. BenTaatjes wrote his first book, Repurpose: The Untold Story of Retirement in America, back in 2017. And after hundreds of podcasts and, of course, several more years of working with retirees, he has learned a few things. And so we spent the last several shows kind of discussing some of these topics and conversations that are mentioned in the book, but maybe some things that he perhaps underestimated since he wrote the book back in 2017. Last week, we talked about the difference on how retirement is going to kind of hit for certain people. There's 2 different kinds, or at least demographics of people, and depending on your personality type, maybe your background, retirement's going to land a little bit differently. BenTaatjes joins me on the show here now, and Ben, last week we talked about, really it kind of comes down to how you maybe perhaps framed or saw your job and career. That's going to dictate maybe how retirement's going to hit for you, so to speak.
Yeah, Jared, and I think some of it's identity, right? It's how people talk about, who they are through what they do so many times. And if I have somebody who is talking about who they are, less about what they do, it tends to be more of a positive reflection of how they will do retirement. Now, I'm not saying it's bad to have a really, more of a career focus and like I am a, financial professional. I mean, that's okay. I mean, part of who I am personally is a financial professional, as a retirement planner. But when I look at that as if that's only my identity, there's a big wake up call coming when I move out of that role into another role. So again, I think the person that's able to say, yeah, I have a job, it's a good job, I feel like I'm using the skills and talents I have, but it's just a job, if you will. Yeah. It tends to be a little bit simpler in that transition.
Yeah, and that was kind of the 2 demographics that we talked about last week, where you had kind of the traditionalists, so to speak, where, the job was just kind of a part of my life that I went through Monday through Friday. Certainly that you, not to say that you didn't try or excel or make that a big part of your life, but at the end of the day, it was just kind of your job. And then there was that other side where it was like there was the identity piece. This would maybe perhaps be your entrepreneurs, business owners, perhaps not always, but certainly could be. But that was kind of the 2 different types, right?
Yeah, if you can't leave it at your work. Is maybe the easiest way to explain it. If you go to work and you can leave work at work, it's probably less your identity, versus you're leaving work and you're taking work home with you. And Jared, this weekend I got to spend some time with my daughter, who's now in college, and we got to go out to Virginia, where she's currently at school, and every time I'm with my kids, I think about those years early in my career where I did take it home with me all the time, and it was my identity. And I think kind of what we're going to be talking about today is, at the end of the day, my kids wanted more of me to be fully present in those moments. I see it. I can see it now much more clearly. And I think as we age, we start to see how we may have done things differently, early in our careers, early in our lives. But at the end of it, it's, can I, as a dad, be a fully devoted dad when I'm at home, or am I still a business owner, entrepreneur, and dad at home?
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing. Can you leave your work at home, can you leave your work at work, and can you be totally different person, but really focus on the things at home when you're at home?
That's a really great point. We're going to talk more about that on today's show. But again, two different kind of archetypes, so to speak, and one certainly isn't better or worse than the other. It's just different. But where you land and how you view your job, your career, perhaps your business, and to Ben's point, can you leave it at work? Is it easy for you to leave it at work, or is it something that is more ingrained in you and something that you have a harder time letting go? That's going to dictate perhaps how retirement lands for you. If you missed last week's show, go check it out. We're on iTunes, your favorite podcasting platform. Go back, check it out. Really interesting show, and we dive much deeper into that topic on last week's episode. So Ben did a really good job of kind of teeing up what we're going to talk about here today, and I think what this is really coming down to is, I think, a mindset shift about the entire season of retirement. So much of retirement is really about a financial plan and making sure the finances are okay and the money. And meanwhile, all of that is so important. I think it's kind of getting back to the basics of what's really important in life, right?
Yeah, what really matters, Jared. And I like I said earlier, I think as we age, we tend to more grasp fully what does matter. We know, the Bible talks about this, right? This earth and the worldly things, will be gone, right? There's nothing lasting about things, right? People and people impact is more important. And nothing drives this home, Jared, like a recent story, a recent client meeting I had. And I got to tell you that story. I was visiting with a woman who was going to be inheriting significant wealth. And, my thought was, in this meeting, you sit down and you're going through, I think she had a general idea that there was wealth coming, but maybe not the full grasp of it. And as we went through how her financial situation, I thought, was going to be so much greater and so significant, this woman started to cry. And I thought, man, this really is impactful. This money that's going to be left, and this, this change in her finances. And she stopped. I said, I can see the emotion. This is pretty significant to you. And she says, yeah, I just want more of my dad and my mom back. I don't need the money. I've got enough already. And it hit me like, there again, I'm thinking, this financial resources, this is going to make a big difference in her life. And really, what really mattered was more of her parents. And I think we're titling this show like, your kids don't need your money, they need you. They need you to be there for them. And luckily for this individual, her parents were there all those years. Yeah. But that's still, it stings at the end. Yeah. And you think that, this financial amount, when somebody is going to hear that news, they're going to be so happy about it, be like, wow, this is going to make so much difference, and begin spending it in her mind. Here's what we're going to do, and we're going to change this and that. Yeah. And ultimately it was still, man, I just wish I had more of mom and dad. Yeah.
Is that kind of strange for you? You kind of feel, we're talking about people's lives here, so I don't want to trivialize this, but in a way you kind of feel like a game show host, like you're going to do a big reveal to somebody about how much money they're going to receive. In this situation, it was a significant amount of money. We're talking, we won't reveal the numbers, but a significant amount of money. You get to reveal them to the heirs. You're perhaps thinking that there's going to be this reaction of like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, which is a really, I suppose, an interesting position for you to be in a lot of ways, because you're dealing with people and you're dealing with the loss of loved ones. But at the same time, too, this is generally good news, that there is this inheritance that's coming. Did that strike you as kind of strange, or did it catch you off guard? How did you feel in that moment?
Well, I think it tells you who the people are, Jared. I mean, I've had meetings where it does go differently, where, wow, that's a significant thing, and the money probably is more important. I mean, this individual had enough already, but I think it does, more than anything for me, reinforce the fact that since writing the book, I continue to be in meetings and hear from people who know that the most important lasting thing that they really are stewarding is their time and their talent and what they're doing with it. It isn't the treasure. The treasure's, part of it. But more importantly, it's what are we doing with our time to make the most of it? What are we doing with the talents God has given us, right? More so than the treasure piece. And I think I've known this, but when you sit across a table from people and you hear it loud and clearly, what is most important? Well, we can all say that, Jared. We can all say, the most important things are family. Most important thing is my church. Most important thing is you fill in the blank. But your checkbook should reflect that.
Right.
Your time spent, and this is one for me, as I was touching on earlier in the show. Like, did my value, putting my value of my children above my work, did my time reflect that enough while I was raising them?
Yeah.
And I wasn't a horrible dad or anything. I mean, I was present, but was I fully present, right? And we go back and we start to think about all those decisions we've made over time. And I think what, again, over and over plays for me is time, talent, treasure. Time and talent first and foremost. Treasure, again, it's every time I think about this, it ends up being at the bottom of the list as being the least important of the three. Time's finite. Especially when we age, Jared, we see that so much. People are like, oh yeah, I just have a little bit of time left. Our talent, right, and the ability to enjoy the time we have is so important. So I think more than anything, that interaction with her, and as I talk with more and more clients and continue to do that, that's the thing that keeps coming up.
Yeah. Time, talent, treasure, you mentioned that. Since the book has been written, I think that you would admit that you've done, I don't want to say a better job, but a more consistent job of asking that question with clients, or new clients especially, of the three, which one's most important. And again, it's a pretty unanimous choice across the board so far, right?
Yeah, not almost every single time we list out, would you rather have more time, talent, or treasure? What do you value the most in life? And it's almost always time, number one, talent, number two, and treasure, is quite a ways behind, right, really, when we start to rank those for people. Now, somebody listening might think, well, yeah, it's because you're talking with people with wealth, and the reality of it is, no, not always. In fact, many times, we talk with people that have more modest means, and the answer is still the same. Because when we value the people around us and the time spent with them, we end up being happier. The world is going to tell us the quickest way to happiness and the best way to live is with the things.
Yeah, more money.
Right? More money, more stuff. And if you talk to people that have more money, more stuff, they will tell you it does not fulfill, it is not lasting.
Yeah.
That is without exception, Jared. Now, short term, oh yeah, this was fun, this was great, but long term, actual happiness, peace does not come from the stuff. In fact, we've talked about this before on the show too. It almost ends up with more problems. I was talking it's the same trip, Jared, that I went on here recently to visit my daughter. I ended up sitting by a young Mennonite family. And, I just asked him, I like to strike up the conversation. Yes, I'm that guy on an airplane sometimes. Yeah. And I just asked him, I said, I don't want to be prying, but I noticed, your wife's dressed very conservatively. You're not watching on the TV screen. You passed on when they hand out the earbuds. Do you want to listen to the music? And you didn't do any of that technology stuff. What is your reasoning for that? Are you part of Mennonite? And he said, well, yeah, a lot of people make a lot of assumptions about that, and I'm glad you asked, and I said, well, let's talk about it. And as we talked about it, Jared, it became very convicting to me
I bet.
of what I have done, that I'm like, man, he sounded almost to have it more right than I did. And now I'm not telling everybody listening here to become Mennonite, but I think listening to why somebody might make the decisions they make, not to allow the media, social media, some forms of technology into their lives to keep the world out, right? He explained it very well. We're supposed to be, in the world, not of the world, right? We're not supposed to start to conform, right? And we've talked about that on the show before. And I got to tell you, listening to him and the simplicity of his life and how much focus he put on relationships and people, it was pretty encouraging. And I think if I took anything away from that conversation, it was, Ben, let's refocus on what's most important here, which is the relationships and the people, not necessarily the things, the wealth, the drive to amass more, which again, the world's going to tell us that's your path to happiness.
I think it's interesting because there's kind of this, it's kind of like a pendulum swing, right? So it's like the last 20 years we've had this influx of technology, and like smartphones didn't exist 20 years ago like they exist now, and we all want those things. And now I think it's interesting because now you're almost seeing more books, blogs, podcasts coming out talking about how do we get rid of those things, and not get rid of them, but break away from them, because I think that we're now penduluming, kind of back the other way, where we're seeing how these things kind of take away. And to your point, it really is about the relationship. I have to tell this because I was trying not to giggle when you were telling that story, but it reminded me of a reel that I saw where somebody was interviewing this gentleman, and he clearly had a lot of money, and he asked him this question: what's most important? And he's like, it's all about the relationships. He's like, it's not really about the stuff. He's like, it's never about the stuff. It's about the relationships. And then the interviewer says, don't you have 2 yachts? He's like, I do, but I don't know where they are. And so there was this paradox of like a guy who clearly had a lot of wealth, and was almost making fun of how much he had, because he had these yachts, but he didn't even have any clue as to where they were. But even he said the kind of the same thing. But it's kind of the same point. Whether you have a lot or a little, this is really for everybody.
It is. And Jared, I with especially since writing the book, it's opened up so many opportunities to work with really successful people all over the country. And I sit down with families, and we're trying to help them with wealth and how to do wealth transfer to the next generation, how to really look at their wealth and what they have biblically. And as I go through that, what I continually hear again is the same story, the same thing. It's like the wealth is fine, the wealth is great, but almost has the ability to cause more stress and problem after a certain point. Now, again, I'm not saying, that a certain amount of wealth or income doesn't provide some, health and ability to do and experience, etc. But I think that it's the driving for more. Right. And the discontent piece, that when I talk to people who have so much, that's what keeps coming up. It's did I prioritize the things versus the people? Was there not enough on relationship and too much on the stuff over time? No. And that's personally, I've had that too, where I'm like looking back and I could have done things differently. So I think that's where the story I told at the beginning of the show, that continues to come up enough for me that it needs to be a bigger part of our conversations with people.
I do want to get into the tactics of how people can do this while they still have time, no pun intended. But talk about this idea of wealth versus, legacy versus inheritance. And in your original book, you did talk about your grandpa, because he has a really interesting story with regard to this, right?
Yeah, I did. I talked about trying to help people see the difference between actual legacy and what I would call inheritance. So legacy, there's many different definitions, but the way I see it is that's your lasting impact on people. Right, that's your people impact. It's the things you're doing through others that will continue to live when you're gone. Inheritance is the money that your kids will spend, and it's as simple as that. Inheritance planning or wealth transfer is still very important. We still want to put guardrails around that. We still want to make a plan to do that, but we should be planning more and spending more time on the side of it that's more true lasting legacy, which is, again, the people impact. My grandfather, from what I could tell, left very little financial means to my dad and his siblings. It wasn't a big financial windfall. In fact, most of them, like we find with most people inheriting wealth today, don't need the money anymore. They're in their 60s or whatever, and that's like, well, what do I need the money now for? But what my grandfather did leave was this really big impact on all of us, to be charitable, to give. And one of the things that I saw when I took over his finances back before he was going into surgery years and years ago, I was new in the business. He said, Ben, I want somebody I can trust. So I said, yeah, I don't like to work with family, but I'll help you, Grandpa. And we sat down. I looked at his tax return. And what I saw was something that I'd never seen at that point before. He had this very large charitable deduction carryover. And it was significant. And my grandfather wasn't making millions of dollars. He had a very modest income. But what it showed me, and the IRS only allows you to at that time deduct 50% of your adjusted gross income for the type of gift he was making. And he had what that showed me, Jared, is he was giving over half of his money away in retirement. And I'll never forget that, because I'm like, man, if he can do that on a modest, $50,000 to $60,000 retirement income, what couldn't I do? What shouldn't we be able? How should I look at what I'm giving away as well? So just a challenge there for me to see, man, how can I be more charitable in my giving? And I've never forgotten that. And again, my dad always did a great job of showing us, hey, don't forget to prioritize giving. We used to have something called the Jesus jar. I'll never forget, it was this little jar which we'd have to take our 10%. It was like, hey, here's your 10%. Put it in that Jesus jar, and then you can give it on Sunday. And unfortunately, with technology and giving, with our our phones nowadays, less of that probably happens. I know for our kids, we taught them. We didn't have an actual Jesus jar, but I think it's really important. But that continues, that charitable intent, and just when you can open up your hands and say, here, God, you own it all. I'm just going to give you this first portion back. It does set the tone. And my grandfather really started that for me. And I got to see it firsthand.
I'm guessing he was probably a pretty happy guy.
His level of contentment, right? Godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. Man, that man was as content and as happy as they come, and I'll never forget that. So, money didn't drive him, right? It was important. He made sound financial decisions, but I know he got more gain from giving. I asked him the question, why give away so much? And he said, well, I just think there's a lot of people out there that need it more than I do. Very, very simple. And again, I don't say this to brag about him or anything. I just say it because I want people to hear. What's most important is it wasn't even the money given. It wasn't the organizations that were influenced, the people that are influenced, other than the people right in his own family. Yeah. So if you're out there listening, I don't have millions of dollars, I don't have, I can't make these big gifts. Think about what gift you can make, which may not even be financial. It might be your time, again, your talents going to make a difference in some person's life, right? That's what legacy is. It's, again, the people impact that we have on those around us.
Yeah, you can be generous with your time. We can be generous with your treasure and your time and your talents as well. It doesn't have to be just that. In fact, it should probably be the full gamut, certainly. We've got just a little bit of time left. What's this look like to somebody who's obviously still alive, retired or nearing retirement? How can people be more engaged? I think what you're saying is people need to be more aware of how they're spending their time, perhaps with technology, as you used, your own example. But put yourself in the shoes of all the people that you've helped over the course of the years. What are some things that they can do or should do or could do more of to kind of really utilize this aspect of time?
Well, Jared, I think it really starts with going back to that very first story I told you. We need to take an inventory of our time. That client told me, I wanted more of mom and dad. your kids, your families, your communities need more of you, right? So start there. Just look at where am I spending my time and does it align with me having a lasting legacy?
Securities offered through BenTaatjes Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through BenTaatjes Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an BenTaatjes affiliated insurance agency.